British Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservative Party won his country's 2015 election in part on a promise to renegotiate the UK's relationship with Europe and hold a referendum on whether to remain a part of the European Union. Now, voters are preparing to weigh in this June on the so-called Brexit, and the polls are very close. Tim Montgomerie is a columnist for the Times of London and a Conservative voice with a very different view than the Conservative Party. And he joins us now for more. Welcome to the colonies.
Thank you.
I guess we should say.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you over here. All right, let's get it on the table. Why should Britain leave the EU?
I think what Britain would like is what Canada has, what Australia has, what New Zealand has, what most independent countries around the world have, is that when the average Canadian goes to the voting booth, they can vote for higher immigration or less immigration. They can vote to subsidise their steel industry or not give any taxpayer help to the steel industry. They know that the laws made in Canada are decided by Canada and no one can overrule them. At the moment, British democracy is a shadow of the democracy in many other countries. We are not a self-governing nation.
You feel you've given up too much of your sovereignty to Brussels?
Far too much sovereignty. So many of our laws are now made in a place which we cannot control. And I think the essence of a vibrant democracy is that you can get the rascals out and change the policies when you're unhappy, as you did so decisively when Stephen Harper was rejected last year. We can change the people that staff our government at the moment, but on a whole range of tax and immigration and rights and other issues, the politicians aren't in charge, and that makes us less than a full democracy.
The theory, though, is that if we give up a little bit of sovereignty, there's payback for that. Being part of a bigger club gets you more. You don't buy that.
Look, I'm passionate about wanting my country to leave the European Union, but the European Union does do some good things, not least on environmental regulation. But overall, you look at the continent at the moment, and you look at the mass youth unemployment across the south of Europe. 50% rates of unemployment in places like Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece, most of all. What's being done to Greece at the moment by a monetary and austerity policy, I think amounts to almost a kind of political vivisection. It's awful what is happening to Greece. Europe's failure to confront Vladimir Putin's destabilization of Ukraine. You look at the rise of extreme governments in Hungary, illiberal, anti-immigration, world go-away governments in Hungary and Poland. You look at Spain and Greece's failure to have a stable government. This is a continent in crisis, and the longer we are chained to a continent that is losing its share of world trade twice as fast as America's, I think we are not getting a good deal.
You call it a continent in crisis, but everything's relative. This is a continent where France and Germany have not gone to war against each other in a very long time. I mean, there's crisis and then there's crisis. One could argue that it's more problematic for the UK to be sort of hitched to Europe in some respects, economically, of course, while being outside the European Union. You don't see that as a problem?
I don't want us to not be good neighbours of the European Union. I want us to be good neighbours rather than unhappy tenants. I'd like us to still be a part of a free trade relationship with Europe. I want us to be active members of NATO. I want the same bilateral cooperation that happens between intelligence agencies to continue.
So that's not being a tenant, that's being a co-owner, isn't it?
It's being a partner. But when I think Barack Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize, months after becoming president, before he'd even really done anything. The European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize, I think 1 or 2 years before. That was the wrong award. The thing that kept peace in the on the European continent, which, as you stress, is incredibly important given Europe's history, was NATO. And it was the commitment of American, Canadian, and other troops to the defence and stabilisation of Europe. That's what made Europe stable. It was free trade between countries that made them economically integrated with each other. Easier to buy something from another nation than to steal it by war. Europe has ceased to just be a free trade area, though now it has ambitions to become a nation, and Britain doesn't want to be part of that. We're quite happy to be our own independent nation.
You must know Hugo Dixon.
Yes.
Hugo writes in The Independent the following: "At the moment when we negotiate with America, China, or Japan, we are doing so as part of the world's largest trade bloc, which accounts for nearly 20% of the world GDP. Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo have to take Brussels seriously as a trade partner. If we were on our own, the balance of power would be quite different. The U.S. economy is 7 times as big as ours, the Chinese is 5 times as big, and Japan's is twice our size. We typically have to play by their rules, whereas at the moment, we influence the EU's product regulations, which then have a chance of becoming global standards." You don't agree with him?
There is some truth to what he says, but it's also the case that there are 26 member states in the European Union. So when the European Union sits down with those trading blocs that he mentions, we kind of have 1/26 of the voice.
But you're at the table at least.
Well, we're not. The European Union is at the table. Perhaps a Portuguese commissioner or a French commissioner. Are they really have uppermost in their mind the Welsh steel industry or the City of London's financial district? Whereas, yes, we'd be Britain rather than this larger European Union if we were sat at the table in those trade talks. But our focus would be entirely on British interests. The European Union is incredibly slow at negotiating free trade agreements because it only can move as fast as the slowest vehicle in the convoy. We could move much more quickly in Britain's relationship with America or Canada because we have that democratic flexibility. So yes, we may have slightly less negotiating weight if we're on our own, but we'll be more nimble and more focused on our own interests.
Here's some more advice for you, whether you want it or not.
I sense I'm going to get it.
Here's Jochen Bittner, political editor of Die Zeit, giving advice to the British people in the pages of the New York Times. He writes, "Do you really want to look on now, a spectator like Switzerland, as Europe retreats into illiberalism and protectionism, and its eastern fringes drift into the orbit of a neo-imperial Russia? You can't isolate yourself from these. You can only worsen them by refusing to do your part. We need British voices, insistent, contrary, and maddening, to disturb decades of self-satisfied dust that has settled over Brussels. We don't just need a union that demands reform from its member states, we also need member states that demand and secure reform from the union. Don't leave the job half finished. Don't leave us Europeans alone with this European Union." How about that?
Well, look, there's a few more grey hairs on my head than I would like. But I've probably been watching European politics for a good 20, 25 years through adult eyes. We've been members of this club for 40 years. I can't remember a time when people said, Europe is about to change, Britain is beginning to have influence. And actually, we have never had decisive influence. We have never been able to stop the kind of project like the Euro project that has caused so much social misery.
Well, you didn't stop it, but you're not part of it.
We're not part of it, but the quote that you just gave me was a call for Britain to help Europe succeed.
Sure.
But if you are constantly ignored, twice as likely to be outvoted in European Council than any other nation, after a while you just sort of get, we're part of this club, but the club doesn't really respect us and take us seriously. I think Europe needs a shock to the system. It's had a number over the years, including the Greek and Euro crisis. It's got another one with the challenge of the refugee inflow from Syria, Afghanistan, and other parts of the world. But it's very slow, very dysfunctional to reform. It's very hard for 26 member governments, all at different electoral cycles with different political complexions of political leaders, to agree on anything. I think not only if Britain chooses to leave, will Europe have to renegotiate its relationship with the 5th largest economy in the world. It will be a big moment. It will be an opportunity for Europe to rethink its structures much more generally and produce a Europe that is more able to address the problems that the German columnist you quote is rightly interested in.
Well, let me ask you about that. Do you agree that the EU is an important institution, as he puts it, standing up against illiberal forces in Europe?
Yes, But if you look at Angela Merkel, I have huge respect for. I think she's one of the giants on the world stage. But I'm sure your viewers are aware of it. But she's doing a deal with the devil at the moment in Turkey. So determined is she to cut the inflow of refugees from that part of the world that's destabilizing Germany and her government. She is willing to initiate a prosecution against a German comedian who has criticised the Turkish president. This is not the European Union of democracy, tolerance and liberalism that I know in her heart Angela Merkel believes in. It's a Europe that is more and more compromised, less and less willing to be that great influence that it should be in the world.
So let's pursue this then. I mean, we have. I don't want to compare it because it's not the same, but we have some experience with the notion of divorce in this country. There have been 2 referendums in which Quebec got to vote on whether it wanted to stay or go. And one of the debates we've had here is, if they vote to leave, how will we actually conduct this divorce? Because the tentacles intertwining Quebec and the rest of Canada are profound and have been together for, technically 150 years as Canada and even beyond before that. So how would you actually do this divorce if it were to happen?
Well, it's unprecedented, so no one quite knows. The government, very deliberately, the British government, has not made contingency plans. So
that you know of?
That we know. I think the Bank of England, for example, has some contingency plans to soothe the financial markets, but there is no great negotiating strategy because David Cameron, George Osborne, Prime Minister and Chancellor, are opposed to it. I find that deeply irresponsible that they haven't prepared for that. It's part of their Project Fear by presenting Brexit as more of a leap into the unknown. They hope to frighten the British people against taking the course. I think in the early stages, if Britain was to vote to leave, the rancour, the hostility, the upset would be enormous. And people would say, oh, Britain's not going to get a good deal. There would be a sense that if we give Britain a good deal, it will encourage other countries in Europe to follow the same path. But I think after a while, Mercedes, that sells huge numbers of cars into Britain, the Spanish hotel industry that depends on many British visitors in the summer, the French wine industry, the Italian fashion industry, will be knocking at the doors of their governments and saying, the European economy is not in good shape. We can't cut off our nose to spite our face and push Britain into a bad position. And I hope Britain will be generous and warm. We are not against Europeans or the European nations. All we want is to better govern ourselves. And it is that line I've already shared with you, I think is the best way of describing. We want to be happy, friendly, warm neighbours, committed to Europe's prosperity. We just don't want to be ruled by Brussels anymore.
Is there a part of you, though, that would be somewhat sad? I mean, the sense of the world is that we're constantly trying to get together on things, not split up. It's not impossible for a split up to be okay. I mean, Czechoslovakia is split up, and it's okay. But Britain's different. Not sad that something might be lost in this divorce?
Something might be lost, but when we joined the European Economic Communities, it then was in the 1970s, we cut ourselves off in significant ways with our old friends like yourselves, like Australia, like New Zealand, like India. At the moment, nations that we have greater historical ties with, citizens of those countries, it's harder for them to get into Britain to live, work and visit than countries like Romania and Bulgaria. For all of their merits as countries and all of the trials that they've been through as part of the Soviet bloc, they don't have the same affinity with us as those more traditional Commonwealth and other allies have. So there is a division, to be honest. Some people want to leave the European Union because they want to pull the drawbridge up. They don't want immigration. They do want the world to go away. In the world where we have the Trump phenomenon, there's plenty of that. It's not my vision. I don't think it's the vision of the majority of the British people. I think we want to be an open, trading, generous nation to the world, but we want to be open to new relationships with the whole of the world, not lost in the increasingly inward-looking, dysfunctional European project, that because of its internal problems is so preoccupied with itself that it isn't the beacon to the world that it should be.
You used to be, I gather, a member of the Conservative Party.
Yes, until quite recently.
You were, I think if I'm right, former Chief of Staff to a former leader of the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith. You're no longer a member of the Conservative Party now?
Correct.
So you've had that divorce over Brexit.
Over more than that, Brexit was the final straw. I think the Prime Minister, in a famous speech in Britain called the Bloomberg speech, said that in his negotiations with the European leaders, he wanted to reform Europe. He wanted to change not just Britain's relationship with Europe, but address some of the problems we've already been discussing. And I think by pretty common consent, even by people who would support Britain's continued membership of the European Union, that negotiation failed. He delivered very little change in the relationship between Britain, London and Brussels. But actually he didn't change Europe at all. But he presented the deal as though something fundamental had changed. He promised to cut immigration. Immigration is rising. Promised to eliminate the deficit. Most of the deficit is still there. He promised that he'd be a different kind of compassionate conservative government. Actually, the latest cuts are falling largely on the working poor, while better off pensioners are actually getting extra benefits. And so it was an accumulation of things, to be honest.
You a Boris Johnson conservative?
Well, Boris is a larger than life, extraordinary politician, and I like his one nation politics, his sense that if you are a patriot, you don't just love a country's institutions, its flag, its history. One nation conservatism, patriotic conservatism, you love its people as well, all of the people. And when they are suffering, when some of them are hurting, that's the test of decent politics. Are you in politics for them, not just those who actually, people who don't need very much help? I think that's his instinct. And I think he has to prove that he's prime ministerial, that as well as being able to entertain, as well as having this vision.
He's highly entertaining.
He certainly is. He will do the day-to-day grind of government, which David Cameron is very good at. But I think David Cameron's days are numbered as Prime Minister.
He said that.
He himself said that sometime during this Parliament he will retire. But for anyone who takes even a passing interest in, say, the British newspapers at the moment, we have the leading papers like the Daily Telegraph, the Sun, the Daily Mail, centre-right newspapers on a daily basis launching extraordinary attacks on David Cameron of the kind that they would normally launch on a left-wing Labour leader, because this issue of the European Union has divided the Conservative Party from top to bottom.
Let me ask you two last
things. So
I
don't think he'll be able to survive for long.
Okay. How do you think the Brexit's going to go, the vote?
Unfortunately, from my perspective, I think Britain will vote to stay in. I think the natural conservatism of the British people will kick in.
Small c conservatism.
Small c conservatism. The fears of economic uncertainty at a time when already the world economy is not in the best of shape. So if it's low turnout, all the enthusiasm is on the outside. So it's certainly very possible we will vote to leave, but unlikely. So 2-1 against, I think.
2-1, okay.
No, 2-1 in terms of likelihood. I think the percentage of the vote will be a bit closer.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thanks so much, Tim Montgomerie from the Times of London.
Thank you for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.